We thought it was just a harmless dare, a late-night scroll through the dark web, laughing at all the bizarre things people put up for sale. Then we found a 10-old porcelain doll listed with no description, just a single grainy photo, and the words, "It chooses its owners." We bought it as a joke. That was 3 weeks ago. Now none of us can sleep. We hear it whispering from the corners of the room. We wake up with it sitting closer to our bed, and last night, we saw it move. If you think you can handle what we captured next, stay right here because what's coming will haunt you long after the video ends. This is Farcical Fears, and tonight's story is one you'll never forget. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next terrifying upload, because you never know which story might be real. Let's move to our first story. I bought the doll as a joke. That's how this entire nightmare started. My roommate Marcus and I had been scrolling through the dark web out of boredom, looking for the strangest things people were selling. There were rusty knives, haunted jewelry, jars filled with what looked like human teeth. Then we saw it, a porcelain doll in a faded white dress, its glass eyes cloudy and cracked. The listing was bare bones, no description, no seller history, no return address, just a single photograph and a line of text that read, "It chooses its owners." Marcus snorted when he saw it. "Bet it's just some creep trying to unload trash," he said. But for some reason, I clicked the buy button anyway. I don't know why. It felt impulsive, like the choice wasn't really mine. The payment page didn't even ask for shipping info. It just went through. 3 days later, a small battered box showed up at our apartment door. There was no label, no tape, just a cardboard box stained with something dark around the edges. Marcus laughed it off when I opened it, but I felt a pit form in my stomach the moment I saw what was inside. The doll was even older looking in person. Its painted smile chipped, its tiny lace shoes tied neatly together as though someone had taken care in packing it. But there was a smell, faint, musty, like rotting flowers. That night, we put it on a shelf in the living room, mostly as a joke. We even named it Celeste to make the whole thing feel less creepy. But the next morning, the doll wasn't on the shelf. It was sitting on the floor by the hallway door, facing my bedroom. Marcus swore he didn't touch it, and I knew I hadn't. We laughed it off at first. Even when it happened again the following day, by the third night, I started losing sleep. I would hear faint shuffling sounds in the apartment, the kind you chalk up to pipes or neighbors. But the noise always seemed to come from just outside my bedroom door. I started locking the door before I went to bed, but that didn't help. One night, I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m. to the sound of something tapping, 3 slow taps against my door. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "Marcus?" I whispered, but there was no answer, just silence, and then a soft scraping sound against the wood, like tiny fingernails dragging downward. The next morning, I found the doll sitting upright outside my locked door. I told Marcus we needed to get rid of it, and for once, he agreed. We drove the doll to a park on the outskirts of town and tossed it into a dumpster. I felt relief as we drove away, like a weight had been lifted. But when we got home that evening, the doll was sitting on the living room couch, its cracked face turned toward the front door as though it had been waiting for us. That was the first time Marcus stopped laughing. Over the next few days, things escalated. Our phones started glitching, freezing on random photos of the doll. I would wake up in the night gasping for air, sure that something was standing over me, only to find nothing. One morning, I discovered tiny scratches on my ankles, like claw marks, even though I sleep under thick blankets. Marcus stopped sleeping entirely. He started hearing whispering, voices we couldn't trace. One night, he swore the doll was sitting at the foot of his bed when he woke up. We tried burning it. We built a small fire behind the apartment complex, doused the doll in lighter fluid, and threw it in. The flames roared high for a moment, but then died down as if smothered by something invisible. When we pulled the doll out, it was completely intact, not a single scorch mark. After that, Marcus changed. He started mumbling to himself, sitting in the living room for hours staring at the doll. When I tried to talk to him, he would snap at me, saying, "She doesn't like it when you interrupt." One night, I woke up and found him standing in the hallway holding the doll at arm's length, whispering something I couldn't understand. I told him we had to leave the apartment, too. Get out before whatever was happening got worse. But he just looked at me blankly, his eyes ringed with dark circles. "It's too late for that," he said. "She chose us." The next night was the worst. I was jolted awake by a scream, Marcus's voice echoing from the living room. I ran out of my bedroom and froze. He was lying on the floor, his face pale and his body shaking violently. The doll was sitting on his chest, its tiny porcelain hands pressed against his throat. I lunged forward and grabbed the doll, hurling it against the wall with all my strength. It shattered, or at least I thought it did. The fragments scattered across the floor, sharp enough to cut my bare feet as I ran to Marcus. He wasn't breathing. I called 911 with trembling hands, but by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I told the police everything, every ridiculous detail about the doll, but they looked at me like I was insane. The paramedics collected Marcus's body, zipped it into a bag, and left. I was alone in the apartment again. That was 3 nights ago. Last night, I woke up to the sound of tiny footsteps on the hardwood floor. I told myself it was just my imagination, pulled the covers over my head, and tried to sleep. This morning, I found it waiting for me. The doll is sitting on my nightstand as I write this, its cracked face turned toward me, one cloudy eye reflecting the pale morning light. I don't remember bringing it into my room, and I don't remember unlocking the door, but I know it's here for me now, and I don't think I'll be waking up tomorrow. Let's move to our second story. I work long-haul trekking routes across Texas, mostly overnight runs when the roads are empty. That's how I ended up on Route 72 just outside El Indio last summer, hauling freight to Houston. It was around 2:30 in the morning when my dashcam caught something I wish I could erase from my memory forever. The stretch of Route 72 I was driving is nothing but open desert and darkness for miles. No gas stations, no houses, just endless black road cutting through sand and scrub brush. My cab radio was barely picking up a station, an old Spanish folk song crackling through static. When I saw something in the distance, at first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote crossing the road. But as I slowed down, I realized it was a person. There was a woman walking barefoot down the center line of the highway, wearing what looked like a tattered nightgown. Her long hair hung over her face, and she cradled something small in her arms. I flicked my high beams on and hit the horn, expecting her to move out of the way, but she didn't. She just kept walking, slow and steady, her head bowed so I couldn't see her face. I slowed the rig almost to a stop, my heart pounding. I was about to roll down the window and call out when she finally turned her head toward me. And that's when I saw what she was holding. Dodd. It wasn't a baby Dodd, it was a porcelain doll. The doll's cracked face glimmered in the headlights, and for just a second, I swore its glass eyes met mine. I wanted to believe the woman was just lost, maybe in shock, but something about the way she moved so stiff, so wrong made me freeze. I reached for my radio to call it in, But before I could, the woman suddenly stepped off the road and disappeared into the brush. I eased forward, expecting to catch her in the headlights again, but there was nothing. Just empty desert on both sides. I told myself it was over. Just a strange encounter I'd tell the guys at the depot about later. But about 30 miles down the road, my dashcam started glitching. The feed on my screen froze for a second, then flickered back on. That's when I saw her again, this time standing on the shoulder of the highway, facing away from me, the doll dangling limply from one hand. I slammed the brakes and leaned forward, but in that split second, she vanished. The feed went black. I tried to shake it off. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight. Maybe I was just seeing things. But then my radio cut out completely, replaced by the same Spanish folk song playing on a perfect loop, like the signal was stuck. I didn't make it far before the headlights flickered, and I noticed something strange on the screen. The dash cam wasn't showing the road ahead anymore, it was showing the cab. My cab. I watched in horror as the camera slowly panned from the driver's seat to the passenger side, and there she was, sitting next to me. I jerked the wheel so hard the rig nearly flipped. I scrambled for the door handle, but the locks clicked down by themselves, trapping me inside. I looked back at the passenger seat, and it was empty. But the dashcam feed was still rolling, still showing her sitting there, holding the doll in her lap. I wanted to rip the camera out of the dash, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. The figure slowly turned her head toward the camera, hair falling away from her face. She didn't have eyes, just too deep, dark holes where they should have been. And the doll in her lap smiled. The next thing I remember is waking up in the cab with the sun in my eyes. The truck was parked neatly on the shoulder of the road, engine off, as if nothing had happened. But my dashcam was missing, ripped clean out of the mount. When I finally made it back to the depot, the guys gave me strange looks. My truck was hours overdue, and they said they'd been trying to call me all night. I told them the truth. Every last detail, but no one believed me. They just chalked it up to exhaustion. A week later, I got a call from a state trooper. They found my truck, again this time abandoned on the same stretch of Route 72, engine cold. But I wasn't behind the wheel. The cab was completely empty except for a single porcelain doll buckled neatly into the passenger seat. And when they reviewed the dashcam footage recovered from the truck, the final frame froze on the doll turning its head. Let's move to our third story. It started as just a rumor. One of those creepy campus legends you hear late at night, whispered in dorm hallways and during study breaks. They called it the Silent Room, a forgotten study chamber hidden deep in the basement of the university library. According to the tale, years ago, a student had gone in there and never come back. Nobody knew what happened. Some said she vanished. Others swore the room swallowed her whole. Most students avoided the place, but of course, that's exactly why I had to see it for myself. I was in the middle of finals week, exhausted and desperate for any quiet place to study. The library was packed. So when I overheard a group of upperclassmen talking about the secret basement room, I figured it was the perfect spot, silent, secluded, and probably untouched for years. When I finally found the access door behind a tangle of dusty shelves, it was barely noticeable, hidden under layers of peeling paint and grime. The lock was old, rusty, and gave way after some effort, creaking open like the door to some forgotten tomb. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The room was tiny, windowless, and completely silent. No hum of fluorescent lights, no distant chatter, just a heavy, unnatural stillness. The walls were lined with ancient, yellowed books, and strange symbols crudely scratched into the plaster. Some looked like warnings, others like Prayers. I sat down with my backpack and pulled out my laptop, hoping the quiet would help me focus. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every sound I made seemed swallowed by the air itself. My heartbeat thumped painfully in my ears. Time seemed to slow, stretching endlessly as I realized I hadn't seen my breath despite the cold. Then my phone buzzed, jolting me. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. One single word: leave. I laughed nervously, assuming someone was messing with me. But then the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. A faint whispering began, barely audible, like the rustling of dead leaves. I strained to hear the words, but could only catch broken syllables in languages I didn't recognize. The temperature dropped even more, my breath now visible in the cold air. Panicking, I tried to stand and leave, but the door slammed shut with a thunderous bang. I reached for the handle, but it was locked, and no amount of pulling or banging would budge it. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a maddening chorus of voices. Shadows curled and danced along the walls, twisting into faces that leered at me with hollow eyes. Desperate, I traced one of the glowing symbols on the wall with my trembling finger. To my horror, it pulsed under my touch like a heartbeat. The room seemed to shift, the walls breathing in and out, closing in slowly as the floorboards groaned beneath me. I realized I wasn't in a steady room anymore. I was trapped inside, some kind of supernatural prison. Minutes, or was it hours, passed. I lost all sense of time. My phone battery died, the screen going black, and I was left alone with the murmuring shadows and my own rising terror. I tried calling for help, but my voice was swallowed by the thick silence. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep within the room. I turned toward a new doorway that had appeared an opening that hadn't been there before. Standing in the dim light was a woman in a tattered dress, her face pale and blurred, eyes nothing but empty voids. She beckoned silently, her movements eerie and unnatural. I didn't want to follow her, but the room pulsed again, tightening. Like a noose, the shadows pressed closer, and I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder. I was forced forward, toward the woman and the darkness beyond. Just as I felt myself slipping away, the door behind me burst open. A group of fellow students had found the hidden door and come searching. The woman vanished instantly, the whispers died down, and the room returned to silence. I stumbled out, breathless and shaken, the door slamming shut and locking itself behind me. Campus security refused to believe my story, dismissing it as exhaustion and stress. They sealed off the entrance again, hiding it beneath more shelves and layers of paint. But the whispers followed me back to my dorm. At night, I still feel cold drafts and hear soft voices calling from just beyond the walls. I'm terrified that one day, the silent room will find me again, because some doors, once opened, never really close. Let's move to our fourth story. My friend Jake was the last person I ever expected to get caught up in something truly terrifying. He was the skeptic, the guy who'd laugh off every ghost story, urban legend, or supernatural claim we ever threw at him. So when he brought home an old, vintage Ouija board from an estate sale, we all thought it was just another prank, a fun challenge to his disbelief. But that night changed everything. Jake set up the board on his kitchen table in the middle of a raging storm. The rain pounded against the windows, lightning flashed, and the flickering candles cast eerie shadows across the walls. We were half joking, half curious as we gathered around, fingertips barely touching the cool planchette. At first, it didn't move. Then, very slowly, it started sliding across the board, spelling out words that made my blood run cold. Help me, trapped. Never leave. We tried to brush it off as Jake moving it intentionally, but the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air grew cold and heavy, our breaths visible in the flickering candlelight despite the heater humming in the background. The shadows stretched and darkened, reaching toward us like tendrils. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The entire apartment plunged into darkness, the storm's fury sounding like a roar just outside. Then Jake's phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. The screen lit up with a single message. "You invited me. We wanted to stop, to say goodbye." But the planet kept moving, spelling out a chilling declaration. "I am here." A pressure settled in my chest, like something unseen was squeezing the very air from the room. Over the next days, Jake's behavior changed. He stopped sleeping, staring into corners and muttering to himself in a voice barely audible. At night, he'd scream and thrash in his bed. We tried to intervene, burning the board in his backyard, smashing it into pieces with a hammer, even throwing the fragments into a river. Yet every morning, the board was back on his desk, pristine and untouched. Once, it was taped to the ceiling above his bed. The hauntings grew worse. Doors slammed shut without cause. Whispered voices echoed in empty rooms. Shadows darted just beyond our vision, always vanishing when we tried to confront them. One night, Jake vanished completely. His apartment was locked from the inside, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The only clue was the Ouija board lying on the floor, blanket resting on a single, haunting word: home. We searched for him everywhere: police, friends, hospitals, but Jake was gone. The apartment remains sealed, a silent monument to the nightmare that swallowed him whole. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind whistles through the cracked windows or the lights flicker, I swear I hear Jake's voice in the static, a desperate whisper, still trapped and begging for help. And I fear the board is waiting, still hungry, ready to claim its next victim. Let's move to our fifth story. I never believed in curses. I grew up in a house where superstition was treated like a joke. My parents rolled their eyes at things like bad luck and haunted objects, and I inherited the same skeptical streak. Shadows were just shadows, creaks in the floorboards were just the house settling, and antiques were only antiques, not vessels for restless spirits. That's why when I found the pocket watch, I didn't feel fear, just curiosity. I'd been cleaning out my late grandfather's attic, a dark and claustrophobic space stacked high with dust-covered boxes and forgotten heirlooms. My parents wanted to sell the house, and I had volunteered to sort through what was left. It was summer, but up there it felt winter cold, the kind of chill that crept up your spine even as sweat dripped from your forehead. I was halfway through digging through a box of moth-eaten coats when I found a smaller wooden box beneath it, tucked away like someone didn't want it to be discovered. It was unmarked, just a plain, scratched-up case with rusted brass hinges. I pried it open and coughed as a puff of stale air and dust hit my face. Inside was the watch. The casing was a dull brass, its surface scratched and pitted with age. The glass was cracked, but I could still see the ornate clock hands frozen at exactly 3:07. The chain was intact but tarnished, a deep black-green from years of neglect. There was something almost deliberate about how it looked, like it wasn't just old, but worn by countless fingers over time. The moment I held it in my hand, I felt a chill. Not the attic chill I'd been shivering through all day, but something else, a cold that seemed to come from the watch itself, seeping into my skin like ice water. For a second, I thought I heard a faint ticking, even though the hands weren't moving. I shook it off and slipped the watch into my pocket, telling myself it was just another antique. Nothing more. At first, it was harmless. I brought the watch home and set it on my desk like any other knick-knack. But that first night, I dreamed about it. I was standing in a dark hallway that seemed to go on forever. Door after identical door lining the walls. The only sound was the soft, steady ticking of the watch echoing off the walls. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, the same cracked glass, the same frozen hands at 3:07, but when I looked up, all the doors had disappeared, leaving me in a blank corridor that stretched into darkness. I woke up sweating. The next morning, I noticed something odd. My kitchen clock was 10 minutes slow, even though I'd replaced the batteries last week. My phone screen glitched briefly, freezing on 3:07 before correcting itself. I chalked it up to bad luck and sleep deprivation, but it didn't stop. Time began to warp around me. The microwave would reset itself to 3:07 every time I used it. My wristwatch, my phone, even my laptop, all of them would freeze at that same time for a few seconds before jolting back to normal. I'd lose minutes without explanation, standing in the middle of a room only to realize half an hour had passed, and the shadows. I started noticing them in the corners of my apartment, dark shapes that weren't quite shaped like people, flickering and twisting when I turned my head. At first, I convinced myself it was just tricks of the light, but deep down, I knew it was in single quotes T. The watch sat on my desk through it all, untouched. Yet every time I glanced at it, the hands seemed different, like they were moving backward, ever so slowly, dragging the seconds and minutes into a dark spiral. One night, I woke up to the sound of ticking dot. It was soft at first, barely audible, over the hum of the heater, but it grew louder and louder until it drowned out every other sound. I turned on the lamp and saw the watch glowing faintly on my nightstand, the hands spinning wildly in reverse dot, and then, as abruptly as it had started, the ticking stopped. The hands froze at 3:07. The room was cold, my breath visible in the air. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck as the air around me seemed to pause. The world held its breath. That's when I felt it. Something was in the room with me. I didn't see it. Not clearly. Just a vague outline in the shadows near the closet door. Too tall, too thin. Shifting slightly as if breathing. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, staring, until the shadow slipped away into the darkness like it had never been there. Over the next few days, it got worse. I started having nightmares every night, always the same looping hallway, always the same watch ticking endlessly in my pocket. No matter which door I opened, I'd end up back at the same spot. The same echoing tick 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 filling my ears. In the real world, I was falling apart. I barely slept, barely ate. Friends commented that I looked pale, hollow. My boss pulled me aside at work and said I seemed distracted. But how could I explain that I felt like I was being pulled out of reality itself? I tried to get rid of the watch. I left it in the trash outside my apartment building. The next morning, it was back on my desk. I drove it out to a bridge an hour away and threw it into the river. When I got home, it was sitting neatly on my pillow. I tried smashing it with a hammer. The hammer shattered. The watch didn't even have a scratch. Desperate, I started digging. I searched online for anything about cursed watches, haunted objects, whatever I could find. After hours of scrolling through forums and reading obscure blogs, I found a thread about a clockmaker named Elias Barlow, a man who specialized in dismantling cursed timepieces. I drove 3 towns over to find him. Barlow was old, his shop a cluttered mess of ticking clocks and dusty shelves. When I showed him the watch, his expression darkened instantly. He didn't even touch it. This watch, he said slowly, once belonged to a man who died outside of time. His final moments trapped in an endless loop. The watch became his prison. And now, by holding it, you've invited the curse upon yourself. I begged him to destroy it. He shook his head. Destroying it will only break the container, he said, and then it won't be bound anymore. I left his shop with my hands trembling and the watch burning like ice in my pocket. That night, the ticking started again, louder than ever. I saw the faces, this time dozens of ghostly visages flickering on the watch's cracked glass. Some were screaming, others were silent, but all of them seemed to be watching me, judging me, begging me. The room warped around me, the walls stretching and twisting into impossible angles. My breath came out in ragged gasps as the floor dropped away beneath my feet, leaving me standing in the endless hallway from my dreams. I ran, door after door, hallway after hallway, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. Every door I opened led me back to the same spot, the same glowing watch in my hand, its frozen hands pointing at 3:07. Please, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Please, just let me go. The watch ticked once, twice, then stopped. I woke up in my apartment, the watch lying on my chest. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. Days, weeks, years, it all blurs together now. My phone no longer connects to the outside world. The sun doesn't rise. Time feels like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Every time I glance at the watch, it's frozen at 3:07. But I hear the ticking, feel the pull, like it's dragging me deeper and deeper into its loop. I don't think I'll ever escape. And if you're reading this, if you ever find an old brass watch with a cracked glass face, do yourself a favor, leave it where it is, because once it chooses you, there's no getting away.